Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. India and China are not only engaged in a standoff over their land borders, Beijing's growing encroachments in the Indian Ocean, including at Djibouti Naval Base and Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, have pushed New Delhi to bolster its naval capabilities and spurred the nation's increasing role as custodian of the Indian Ocean. With 2 aircraft carriers and 140 vessels and growing, we're asking, has India's Navy arrived? Joining us to discuss this are Raian Hossain, University of Nottingham School of Politics and International Relations Doctoral Researcher, and Sana Hashmi, Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. This year, India hosted Milan 2024, its largest ever joint maritime exercise with over 50 countries participating, including the United States, Japan, Australia, France, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Russia and Iran. In Hindi, Milan means meeting. India describes the exercise as a gathering of friendly navies involving friendly foreign countries. Sana, let me ask you first. So what was the objective of this year's drills?
India has been conducting Milan for over 2 decades now, and it benefits all the countries involved in the exercise. It advances the interoperability of all the countries, but if I may just talk about what are the benefits for India. India is the 8th largest naval power in the world. But since the competition between India and China has started, what we are also seeing that India is trying to be the security provider for the region. And India has a lot of naval exercises with a number of countries, and India is also heading exercises such as Milan as well as Malabar, which is now a de facto Quad exercise. So it's established now that India is an effective counterbalance to China. And when it comes to Indian Ocean is a geopolitical theater where we are seeing a lot of competition between, not just between India and China, but also between US and China. So what India has been trying to do is to strengthen its leadership role within the Indian Ocean region, but you also have Russia and Iran. So I don't think that any other country apart from India could do such a thing.
Yeah, it's quite unique gathering of countries there. Right, let's just quickly talk about the unfriendliness of what China is doing. So in the very opening, I mentioned the Djibouti Naval Base as well as Sri Lankan port. You know, obviously the fear, especially with Sri Lanka, was that, because the Chinese company, state-run company, is going to take 80% of ownership and, of course, the lease of this to China.
If you see China's presence over the Indian Ocean, in Djibouti, then in Gwadar port in Pakistan, then in Sri Lanka. So this is kind of the strategy, what a lot of Western scholars and Indian scholars try to see from the strategy, what we know as a string of pearls, right? So it's trying to expand its influence. So currently they have around 20 to 25 ports, which is administrated by China or has certain administration over it. So which gives a point of thing, a threat for India in the future that might be converted into a military purpose in the long run. So that is very obvious for India to feel a bit of security dilemma coming out from this. So overall, I think...
But at the moment, what evidence is there? So the people who are not on the US side, and allies, will say, what evidence do you have there? I mean, at the moment, it seems that, and maybe I can address this to Sana, that Hambantota port is becoming a very successful transshipment hub because of its location.
No, I think it's definitely a very, very grave security concern for India. And it's just not about India-China differences that India is now playing an assertive role. It's also how China's footprint in India's neighborhood as well as in the Indian Ocean region are increasing, and India has to respond to that. And we saw how, due to the debt trap, the Belt and Road Initiative and Sri Lanka's involvement, that Sri Lanka had to give Hambantota port to China for over 99 years. So imagine the kind of security threat that India is facing from China's presence in its own neighborhood. So Hambantota port definitely serves dual purpose. It's just not about shipment. It's just not about China having benign objectives. It's also about use of Hambantota for military purposes.
But what evidence is there of that? I just want to clarify. It'd be great to...
No, we are also seeing that the spy vessels have been docked at Hambantota port. So I think there are satellite imageries, and also there are tangible evidences of what China has been doing. Look at China's military presence that have been expanded in Sri Lanka and the wider Indian Ocean region. And this is one of the reasons why not just India, even the US is concerned about China's footprint in South Asia as well as the Indian Ocean region.
Okay. Now, during the exercise of Milan, India deployed 2 aircraft carriers, the INS Vikrant, India's first indigenously built carrier, making its international debut, and the INS Vikramaditya, a modified carrier from Russia. Now, India also plans to construct its 3rd carrier in 2030. So, Ryan, let me come to you.
Right.
What does this say about India's naval strength? 2 aircraft carriers.
Right. So if you follow India's foreign policy over the last 10 to 15 years under President Narendra Modi, you have seen some pragmatic diplomacy, what is followed by India, not actually following the exact footsteps from Washington. You see the Ukraine-Russia crisis, how India has behaved in its own foreign policy manner. So that also reflects
the non-aligned approach, right?
Right. So that also reflects how its defense and security policy it needs to think in a multipolar world order system, as it's very much dependent. Its defense procurement has been very much in the past has been dependent on Russia. If we see the polarity is shifting, so India wants to move its own dependency, first of all. And secondly, if you see that it is building domestic procurement stuff, it is trying to lessen its procurement from the outside world, and it's trying to build its own. I think in 2014, President Narendra Modi said by 2020 it would reduce by 70%. We don't see nowhere near to that landmark for India, but at least that's a good beginning to start with. Lastly, I would like to add that it's also part of the economic security. It doesn't want to lose its balance of payment outside. Outflow of foreign currency is very important in this current world.
Yeah, if I may also add something to what Ryan said. I think when it comes to India showing its military power, specifically naval capabilities, it's more about that how India is not shying away from assuming a greater role in the Indian Ocean region. And you know, when China's assertive is ever growing, and India is also sharing burden with the US and other Quad countries. So of course, India is not in any form of alliance, but then, you know, India is definitely cooperating in terms of issues. So there is more like issue-based coalition when it comes to India here.
Yes, and I understand obviously Milan behind that is, you know, this shared belief in a free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Ryan, so this is, we've mentioned the United States. This is only the 2nd time, actually, in about 20 years that the United States has joined Milan, and also Russia deployed warships to the exercise. I don't know how many times Russia, maybe you know, has joined in. So can you tell us, why don't you start off with what's the US's interest in the Indian Ocean?
So if you see that the American importance to the Indian importance in front of the American eye is really at the highest point right now, given the common threat perception towards China. So America is trying at its level best to tap on its regional partner, which is India, because it's very difficult for the America, which is a distant power, to counter China right at South or Indian Ocean region. So that gives the higher importance of India at the recent past. So America also the Quad thing, and so it's trying to build its utmost confidence with the Indian defense and security as well. So and on the other side, if you see the Russian factor, what you have spoken about, it's about Russia has been a long-time ally of India since the Cold War time.
And is that Russian relationship with India, is that as much about sort of, you know, the building relations with the global South, of which obviously India is one of the leaders for Russia?
When we talk about India-Russia relations, I won't really count it as a relationship that is a part of India's maneuvers in the global South. I think India has a very different and unique relationship with Russia. It's a very traditional partnership that India shares with Russia. So
what is it based on? What would you say it's based on?
Then it's just not security, strategic objectives that India has here, but then during the Cold War period, how Soviet Union has supported India, be it with China, be it on Kashmir. So this is the partnership, this is the friendship that has stood the test of time, at least for India. And then apart from that, we all know that how India has been dependent on Russia for its arms supplies. Of course, that's changing after Russia-Ukraine war. We have seen that how India is actually moving towards self-sufficiency, and also looking at other partners, the US interest in the Indian Ocean region. When it comes to the US, of course, it has to be it's not a resident power, but it has to start maneuvering in the Indian Ocean region through partners such as India and Japan. And India is very willing to help the US here, because India's own interests are at stake here. Freedom of navigation is one of the main interests for the US here. Then, of course, when the US thinks about countering China, the first country that comes to the US mind is definitely India.
Raian, the US looks to India when it looks for somebody to rival China. Why is that?
So I think that's because it's a tested partner for, and they have a biggest threat perception, common threat perception towards China, and the history, if you see the Gan Valley Incident and this kind of incident. So India.
So briefly, if you can tell us about that incident, the Gan Valley Incident.
So it happened in 2020 when the Gan Valley Incident between the Indian force and the Chinese force have came to stand in the position of, and India has lost around 20 soldiers, and China has lost of 4 soldiers.
In hand-to-hand combat.
Yes.
Yep.
So because it's a arms-free zone that has been signed before, thankfully, or else the problem could have been more escalated.
Yeah.
So that kind of things gives America to believe on, and also India shares the right border with China.
Yeah.
So it's the first line of defense for America to believe on India in that context, I believe.
And also, obviously, India's strengths, which we talked about, their military and their growing navy. Sana, can we sort of clarify, what is the threat from China, especially in the Indian Ocean? Is it that we are worried about it seizing control, essentially, through its control of the ports along the string of pearls in the Indian Ocean? What exactly is it that we're...
There's a famous saying that whoever controls the Indian Ocean controls the entire Indo-Pacific region. So I think China is definitely believing and practicing towards that road. As in, there are a lot of countries who talk about traditional security threat and non-traditional security threat. So for India, a non-traditional security threat and responding to it also is very important. So this is one of the reasons why India is actually being called as a first responder. And if we go back to the history of quadrilateral dialogue was started as a response to tsunami Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. But when it comes to China, the objectives are very different. The objective is to have more and more territory, more and more control. And there's the realization not just within China, but also among a lot of other countries, that if they want to achieve the great power status, they have to have more and more maritime power.
Is because of China. Okay, Raian, so let's bring in Taiwan here. So how do you see the Sino-Indian competition influencing relations between India and Taiwan?
I will try to answer that. Probably Dr. Sana would be the best person to answer it. But yet, I think this is going, if you see the growing ties between India and Taiwan, it's completely, to a certain extent, has changed after 2020. India was very reluctant until 2020. It didn't show much of positive vibe towards Taiwan. So when India felt that its one India policy has been challenged by China, when you see in the Kashmir factor as well as 2020, the Gan Valley incident where we're speaking, that has certain momentum given a momentum has changed for the Taiwan-India relations, and it's growing since then. But it is yet to pick up, I think, on a different level. Taiwan has to do its more part to convince India, I think.
Okay, Sana, do you want to add any quick remarks?
No, definitely. As in the past 4 years, the India-Taiwan relations have totally transformed. And one of the major reasons is, of course, China. And when I say China, I don't mean that India is trying to use Taiwan as a card against China. But this entire idea that we don't have to respect China's red line has gone from India's strategic thinking. And this is one of the reasons why India is reaching out to Taiwan. And I think India is definitely shedding its hesitancy. Our Prime Minister just tweeted when the earthquake happened in Taiwan, and I think that was unprecedented. Even Joe Biden and Albanese didn't tweet, but Prime Minister Modi tweeted. And apart from that, our foreign minister has been talking about the importance of Taiwan as a key economic partner for India. So the changes that I'm seeing right now in India-Taiwan relations were unimaginable and unprecedented.
Thank you for that. So, to find out more about Chinese activities in the Indian Ocean, I spoke to Byron Chong, a research associate and the editor of China-India Brief at Lee Kuan Yew School at National University of Singapore. I began by asking why New Delhi was so concerned about Beijing in the Indian Ocean.
Well, China has been involved in infrastructure projects with India's neighbors, including Pakistan, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. Most notably, it has established a naval base in Djibouti and gained control of Sri Lanka's Hambantota port on a 99-year basis. These projects have greatly increased China's presence and influence in the region. The other activity that's gotten a lot of attention recently is the presence of Chinese research vessels in the Indian Ocean. These vessels have links to the Chinese military, and you really see this fear manifested when you consider Sri Lanka's decision in January to declare a moratorium on foreign research vessels entering its waters, because this decision was most likely made due to intense pressure from India.
In terms of the information that's gathered, can you explain what sort of advantage that would give?
Oh, because the information collected is data like seafloor features, ocean currents, layers of water, salinity of water. So all this information could potentially help in the conduct of submarine operations in the Indian Ocean. In the case of a potential crisis in the Indian Ocean, China could potentially send its submarines as a threat to India. So when you have submarines operating in the region, you need to have that important information on how to maneuver, how to hide from the enemies. This creates a strategic advantage to China.
There is an Indian Monroe Declaration. This is in part modeled on the US's Monroe document. How important is it to understand the development of India's Navy in relation to that document?
Well, the Monroe Doctrine is basically based on the idea that India sees itself as the primary power in the Indian Ocean and therefore wants to limit the military presence of extra-regional powers. That said, India has traditionally placed more emphasis on its army rather than its navy because of its geography, right? Because it shares land borders with its rivals Pakistan and China. But with China's growing naval presence in the Indian Ocean, India has begun to place more attention on its navy, right? There's been a greater push in India to acquire more advanced ships, submarines, and aircraft, and to invest more in naval technology and infrastructure.
Do you think that it does give India the power to sort of influence or shape regional diplomacy?
Well, that depends on how you define regional diplomacy, right? India's naval capabilities at this point are sufficient to be utilized as a diplomatic tool to a certain degree. For example, they are sufficient to be used in joint naval exercises as a means of building and strengthening defense partnerships as well as political signaling. For example, if you look at the Malabar exercises that India conducts with its Quad members, the US, Australia, and Japan, on one level, these exercises serve to strengthen the defense partnership between the Quad navies by enhancing interoperability, trust, and coordination. But on another level, the exercise also sends a signal to other countries, right, that the Quad is committed to and capable of balancing China's assertiveness in the region. So, in terms of strengthening defense partnerships, in terms of political signaling, India's navy is sufficient to do the job.
That was Byron Chong of National University of Singapore speaking with me earlier. Turning to the India-China border, the Telegraph paper in India has reported on a leaked internal report from the Indo-Tibetan Border Police outlining 19 sensitive spots along the China-India border, stretching from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. The report suggests that the People's Liberation Army may invade these areas after the summer snow melt. Sana, let me come to you. How credible is this report, and, these 19 locations, why?
I am not sure if the reports are credible or authentic because the government hasn't said anything. There are multiple reports, and in fact, I feel that since 2020, we have been seeing multiple reports on different news, but then the government has been very, very mellowed on and kind of keeping the information to themselves, and also because it's changing the public perception about China and India. So we are not sure, but it's China has been invading India's territory, and the frequent standoff that we have been seeing for decades is just intensifying. So I feel that there is definitely some credibility to China's aggression and assertiveness at the LSE, but also I do not think that it is also going to be easy for China. Indian government, Indian military has been very alert in responding to the Chinese threat. I think Indian government is definitely much more prepared than how it was perhaps a decade ago.
Okay, so how are they prepared? Ryan?
So I think for the military, if you see the China threat perception for India, it has been for long, and that you can see throughout the military modernization of India. Right?
So they've had a long time to catch up.
Yes. So, and I think it also picked up from 2020. A couple of things, if you see the establishment of Chief of Defense Staff Office, which shows the well coordinated from the Army, Navy and Air Force, so they can have a coordinated, which we saw last in 1999 during India-Pakistan issue. So that gives, that was a recommendation set by the committee after the war, that to have a coordinated office. And then if you see the procurement part of Indian defense over the last few years, it has been looking into the more modern technologies. Like it is looking into how you can see a radar system, then the GPS systems, how this modernization process has started to take up. So Indian Army is also placing a big role in building infrastructures around the LSE. So all these things.
The line of actual control.
Yes.
Yeah.
So these things actually shows that in 2022 and 2023, there are new projects launched from the Indian government, which is carried out by the Indian military over the line of control. Right, LSE, sorry. So that shows how India's military modernization process has been already. Also, what we spoke before, it's about how its own defense procurement has been its top priority, right?
Yeah.
So.
Okay, Sana, do you want to add to the preparations that most definitely are underway? I mean, basically, we're talking about waiting for the winter snows to melt, so they must be preparing.
No, Adin, definitely India, the Chinese side of infrastructure and preparedness was much better because India never realized that China was a primary threat. China was perceived as a friendly country. So there was definitely a stab in the back in 2020, again from the Chinese side. But Ryan already mentioned about the defense capabilities, but apart from that, the infrastructure is definitely ramping up.
So Indian roads, I mean, the cellar tunnel.
The road cellar,
yes.
And Indian military has initiated programs such as Vibrant Villages, infrastructure, and of course the cellar tunnel, which is I think going to be a very, very effective deterrence against China.
We've got a picture that shows the cellar tunnel in terms of where it's located. Do you want to talk us through that in terms of perhaps what difference it could make in terms of this the border dispute? Ryan?
Right. If you see at the picture, if you see that infrastructure building along the line of control, it allows Indian military to travel to the disputed areas very fast. Right. So if you see in the past, before this cellar tunnel was built, it would be difficult for Indian Army to reach at the disputed places at the very fast. So it reduces the mobility, it increases the mobility of the Indian defense and the military, it reduces the time period of traveling at least.
Especially in bad weather.
Yes, especially in the bad weather, because previously in the heavy snow, that mobility was very much restricted. Right now it allows Indian defense to travel despite whatever the weather condition is. And also about this cellar tunnel allows the, Indian defense to carry heavy artillery and military equipments through that. So previously it would have been very difficult. So like T-90 tanks could have been easily traveled there. So artillery equipments. So that gives an holistic advantage for the Indian military over that region, I think, the cellar tunnel.
Sana, give us a sense of, the ice and the snows, the weather there. I mean, we're not in the northern Himalayas, but give us a sense of how it, creates ceasefire or, protects the border during winter.
I don't think the ceasefire is something that we are going to see anytime soon, because we are not really seeing that China is willing to give concession, and India is definitely not willing for rapprochement until the concerns are adequately addressed. So I think, of course, the whether.
So you're saying that there isn't kind of like a break or a pause over winter? No.
No, and then of course, you know, the intensity is definitely low when there is winter, when there is snow, because I think the mobility is definitely going to be very, very difficult during winter. But you know, you also have to see that we have already passed 4 winters now, and now the summer is now happening, and then I don't think that when we reach the next winters this year, I do not really see a rapprochement happening between India and China. So I think we are just going to see the status quo is the new norm that we have seen since 2020, and I think this is just going to be continued between India and China.
Okay, Ryan, finally, very briefly, do you think that we might see a Chinese sort of attack on several locations?
Personally, I think that would be a wrong move from the Chinese side if they do so, because the global political context has been changing, and Indian preparedness, though it's nowhere near to the Chinese side of infrastructure building and military modernization. But then again, that would create a big, because the interdependency between the economy is so high. So that interdependency of its economy must also be calculated from both sides of the border, and try to get as much as negotiation. There has been negotiation going on, I think 20 or 22 rounds, but we haven't seen much output from it. So getting a middle ground from the negotiation would be most ideal from both sides, I think.
Okay.
I want to add to that. A few days ago, our foreign minister has already said that I'm not going to compromise with my national security just because we have to trade with China. And I feel this is something that Indian government has been practicing. And so I don't think there's going to be any, and India has kept the channel of communication open with China. So it's just China that's not resolving the dispute, that's not listening to India's concerns. So I think the ball is definitely in China's court. India has been doing whatever it could. So the ball is in China's court.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Raian Hossain and Sana Hashmi, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today.